Thank you all for coming. My name is Stephen Kim. I'm a postdoc at Fiete Lab, and I'm gonna be moderating this session. It's always nice to reconnect with the same people who've walked on the same halls and then go out and do incredible things. And I guess this is a good chance for us to ask honest questions and hear real stories. So I think we can get started. Obviously, if we start like this, no one's gonna ask any questions. So I prepared some questions. We can get started, and then if you have any questions in the audience, well, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll have you ask the question. Okay, so the first question is for Sean, Jacob, and Janelle. All of you have spent time at the McGovern Institute, and what makes this a unique place for research? How did this environment help shape your career and set you up for success?
So to me, McGovern is like an integration of multiple levels of expertise, including molecular, cellular, and a circuit, and then system neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, and the neurotechnologies. That really helps a student and a postdoc to learn, collaborate, and discover something that meaningful and make an impact. And then, of course, it's important to have the vision from the founding members like Phil Sharp, and then the emotional support, financial support, and scientific support from Laura and Pat McGovern, and also the incredible support from Bob and the team. So I think that's what makes McGovern unique.
I just want to second all of that. But no. Yeah, okay. Wow, I'm really bad at microphones today. Okay. No, I'm good. I want to second all of that. The thing that really stands out about McGovern is that everyone is here in the building, right? And so it's really rare, I think, at various universities to have people coming from so many different levels of analysis who are studying the brain to actually just run into each other in the hallway, or for it to be so easy to go to a seminar. And that's something that I feel like I really appreciated during my time here, because it gave me this huge breadth of the different aspects of brain and cognitive sciences.
Yeah, I think I have a similar perspective on how amazing it was to be here, where there really doesn't seem to be much of a barrier between labs. So a lot of the stuff that I talked about happened because I was able to walk down the hallway, and let's start with the tech development stuff with OpenEphis. That really happened because it was completely normal to just start working with people from, in this case, Matt Wilson's lab, Chris Moore's lab. Then in Mark's lab, we walked over to Michael Fee's lab, and the group of people that developed this really couldn't care less about which lab people were from, even where the money was coming from. We knew we were going to be supported. Our advisors gave us a lot of rope to do stuff that maybe in the beginning they didn't know where it was going to go, but they believed in that we had some type of vision. Maybe you'll have to ask Mark. In this case, it worked out. But I think there are many such stories for all of us here. The stuff I did with Mark that I didn't have time to talk about, there's a whole project that only happened because Ela was around. And we could basically treat her lab as part of Mark's lab and vice versa, and have a really fruitful theory experiment collaboration, where it wasn't like we had a theory and then we did the experiment, but we really ended up going back and forth a lot and wrote the paper together. That's not that straightforward to do when there's barriers between labs and senior PIs have to jockey for authorship, or there's feelings of, that there's that only one person can be last author or whatever. This was never a thought for us. It was always science first, and then we see where that leads us.
I see. Thank you. And this question is for Mark, Anya, and Dimitri. And all of you have been in academia for a while. And how has your definition of goals or success have changed over time?
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Long time. Oh, wow. Okay. I think the definition of success probably changed quantitatively, right? I mean, when I started grad school, if you're a grad student at MIT, you're basically used to success your whole previous life. You've basically been successful at everything you've tried. That's how you got into MIT grad school. And then you come in here and you do your first experiment. And we moved into this building in October, I think October 19th. And I did my first experiment, which was injecting this drug 6-OHDA into a bird, and failed miserably. I don't even know why. I mean, I probably didn't know what I was doing, but and I remember coming home for Thanksgiving the next month in November and telling my parents, I don't think I'm cut out for this. And they were like, you've been at it for a month. Have you figured out where the bathroom is? Like, this is how unrealistic my expectations were for myself, right? And I think that basically once you do more and more experiments and you do more and more things, you realize that if 10% of the experiments that you run are successful, you're like the most successful scientist on the planet, right? And so you just kind of learn to calibrate that. And you kind of don't treat failure as failure anymore. You just treat it as kind of a statistical thing that is part of the distribution. So I think that's really, yeah, I think it's been a quantitative change. I don't know if qualitatively the definition of success has changed. I still find the same things rewarding, but I just don't expect them to happen every day.
So yes, I second that. One way that my definition of success has changed as I'm now in my sixth year of running my own lab, is that I think when I was here, success was about my own success. It was about me, making progress and making new discoveries and publishing papers, and now I feel just as much satisfaction and a feeling of success when my students get grants, when they, not just because it brings money to the lab, but because I know that it's helping their career. When they, I just had my first PhD student graduate a few weeks ago, and I was telling people it felt much better than my own defense. I appreciated it a lot more. When I defended, I was just like, all right, on to the next thing. I didn't really stop and sort of think about the road that got me there, and so when my student graduated, I really was able to sort of appreciate that road a lot more. So for me, that's I still derive a lot of success from discovering new things, and all the scientific passion is still there, but now it's sort of been expanded to the success of my mentees as well.
Yeah. I think getting into science, the kind of basic perception is that, okay, our goal is to find out stuff, find out the answers, right? And being at MIT really has shifted my focus to the importance of not finding the right answers, but finding the right questions, figuring out what questions really matter, what questions are worth asking. Ultimately, if you find out an answer to a question that nobody cares about, what does it matter? And so this idea of creating building blocks, finding answers to questions that matter and that other people can build upon, that's really something that I think my mentors here have taught me. And I think that's also kind of what makes MIT stand out from many other places. People at MIT aren't scared of asking big, important questions. I think kind of, there is a temptation to ask a question that you can find an answer to, and you're going to move forward. And for me, I needed to break out of that to figure out, okay, can we ask bigger, scarier questions that are ultimately more important?
Oh, yeah. Quick. Do we have a mic? Or you can ask questions.
Thank you, Fox. My question is, innovations in the past 20 years have been largely driven by methods, more neurons, more genes, more proteins. But I see a trend, especially, I think Dimitri, you said that you staked your career on new behavior.
Repeat the question. Okay, sure.
So how did you make that decision, and how has it been received by larger neuroscience?
For those of you who couldn't hear the question is, how For Dimitri, how would you make up the mind to start, from scratch?
Well, I mean, I think this particular question was, a lot of the stuff here was about methods and how innovations over the past couple of decades have really driven a lot of research, and you're kind of implying that in my case it was a little different. I think there's some nuance here. So the system and the question were very old. It's true. These birds had been studied for decades. The question of how memory works is a question that has been interesting to people for a very long time. But the reason I was able to do it is because of the innovations in technology. And the innovations that didn't come from my lab, that came from many other places. Innovations in large-scale recordings, which made these recordings possible. Innovations in artificial intelligence that allowed us to do video tracking of these birds and to even figure out what they were doing at what moments in time. Innovations in computer science and the kinds of analyses that we've been able to do. So it's all definitely driven by technology. I think it shouldn't be entirely driven by technology, because then you're not asking interesting questions. But the kind of technological advances in the past couple of decades really make me feel lucky to be living in this era. Yeah.
Yep.
So you all just started your career. Bob said in 2050. Yeah. So what's the burning question you have now? For next.
Somebody else. Somebody else.
So what's going to be interesting question, by year 2050? I guess that's the question, right?
What question would you pursue?
Yeah, what question will you pursue in...
Relevant in 2050.
Yeah, well, relevant in year 2050.
I mean, I'm happy to go first. I think that what is sort of in the air right now is the question whether the current progress in AI is going to lead to some type of breakthrough, where I'm already getting questions at some conferences. This is an interesting method you have there, but why are you applying it to something as not interesting as the mouse brain when you could be studying something interesting like a large language model? That's a real question I got. And I think a lot of us are waiting to see what's going to happen over the next decade, whether AI really gets to the point where it's useful to study AI and then see whether maybe some of it also happens in the brain. I am currently still believing that there is sort of special sauce in the brain, that we do something fundamentally differently from AI systems, and that we're going to be busy studying that for a while. I have a young kid, so I've recently witnessed language acquisition that tends to push people this direction. But I think that's one of the big bifurcations that, in my opinion, is sort of in the air right now as to what that question might be.
Yeah, I also, I guess, want to chime in sort of with the AI aspect of it, which is that I think that in the last 10 years or so, we have gotten really good at making these large-scale computational models, and they are really good at replicating a lot of behavior and brain responses. But I really think that we can hopefully turn that around and actually use these models to learn something new about biology. And so once we have these models that we think might actually be capturing something interesting, hopefully we can actually use them to sort of propose hypotheses for how the brain may actually be performing some sort of a computation. Like maybe there is some special sauce biological constraint that if we include it within one of these models, we see some emergent property that we also see in biology. And so that is something that I'm really looking forward to pursuing.
I'll just briefly add one thing. So from the perspective of a systems neuroscientist, so there's been a lot of effort over the last 5 years or so in sort of scaling everything up, right? Record more neurons, right? Record from more brain areas, and I think that's been a worthy effort that we need to continue. But one challenge I think that we're still facing is that we can measure spiking in these neurons in these populations, and correlate those spike patterns with things, right? But ultimately, I think the place we need to get to is to understand how those spike patterns are generated. What is the underlying computation in terms of the input-output transformations that are resulting in these large-scale patterns and how they evolve within particular brain areas? When you measure a representation in spiking, of course, that could be a product of the inputs, or it could be a product of the computations that are performed locally. And so, I think we're starting to have the tools now available to understand sort of the principles for how information is transformed across brain regions. What are the fundamental underlying computations? But I think we still have a long way to go in that area.
The reason I asked the question, Francis Crick tried to answer the question, what is consciousness? He spent 30-some years pursuing. And I built your earphone product. Spent how many, 40 years to try to find molecule motivation? You found it.
Oh, I didn't find it. I wish I could take credit for that.
And one of the questions, nobody had any answers. What's molecule of memory? You can solve such questions. That's like being at of Felix. Imagine that. For neuroscience.
Yeah, another question?
So we talked a lot about culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked a lot about culture today and how McGovern strives to create a collaborative culture where people feel empowered to be creative and make discoveries. And I think every institution or department has the goal to create a culture like that. But there's just a lot of variability about how successful places are about that. You guys have all been at various institutions at different stages of your career. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about, like, what are things that are maybe not obvious that have allowed that to work, and what are the things that prevented that?
I have at least one opinion on this, which is that I think it comes down to trust at the end of the day, right? To collaborate means partially being vulnerable to the other person not being a good partner in that collaboration. And if you have a group of people trying to work together that don't know each other that well, or have only met on the internet, and then over COVID there was a lot of stuff on Zoom, that makes it hard to understand how the other people tick. And I think, I don't know what happened at the McGovern Institute here, but from my very limited point of view, it looked like all the people that were in charge really liked each other and communicated a lot. And that's obviously not a solution, but it's a dimension along which to be aware that just spending more time with each other and recognizing that science is a social endeavor is extremely important, right? Whatever you do, more of that is never going to hurt your ability to form better collaborations.
Okay. I mean, another question that I sort of prepared was sort of, related to what, what the audience asked. But I guess, what could be the future? What could the future hold for your field in terms of, both science and human health, for all of you?
I mean, I think about some people already kind of answered it.
Yeah.
I didn't yet. I really almost refuse to make predictions of the future, because if you try to predict something 25, 50 years in advance, and you want to evaluate how good your prediction might be, look back 25, 50 years, try to put yourself back in that place and ask what predictions you would have made. And they would have been so wrong, right? I mean, even 25 years ago, optogenetics happened in 2005. Breakthrough in artificial intelligence, 2012, right? I mean, these are high-density neural recordings, even more recent than that. I don't remember the year NeuroPixels came out, right? And I was already doing neuroscience 25 years ago. Nobody was talking about that kind of stuff. People were talking, I won't say what things people were talking about, but the things people were excited about are no longer exciting, right? And the predictions that people were making about what kinds of things were going to be big in neuroscience, many of them were just fads, right? So, so I would really want to talk to you all again in 25 years and see where we are, because the most exciting things are going to be ones that none of us are thinking about right now. Yeah.
I mean, to answer the question what the future holds, I think excitement. Honestly, I think we're so lucky to be doing neuroscience. It's such a growing, rapidly developing field. Part of why we can't make predictions is because things are changing so quickly. And I think it's a good thing. I don't think it's bad. I think it's exciting that we have all this methodology. And, you know, if like we are given the opportunities to keep doing what we're doing and have, you know, not like funding and support and not grants being pulled and not our students leaving, like if we can just keep doing this, I think it'd be really, really cool, and you know, we would have many surprising, unpredictable discoveries.
Yep.
Professor Lander showed a fascinating story of these challenges of how they overcame them. Do you have any exciting challenges that in the past and how they shaped you as a scientist that you are right now?
So the question is, do you have any challenges that you find exciting? No, that's okay. It's hard to even hear from here too.
Thank you so much. Professor Lander shared a fascinating story of his challenges in the past and how he overcame them and how it shaped his journey. Do you have any such challenges?
Okay. Sorry. It's
Right now.
the
What are some of the challenges that have shaped you?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was waiting for them to answer. Do you have an extra?
It's okay, take your time.
We blocked it from our memory. I think I have at least I had a little bit of a time during my PhD where I think what happened was that I tried an experiment that was technically very hard and it didn't quite work, but we were very excited about it. And we thought that the result could be really impactful in the sense that we weren't quite sure what the science was, but we thought we could write a cool paper about it. And at the time, this was something that motivated me because I figured this was an important career step. And I spent a good amount of time chasing that result and spending a lot of time on follow-up experiments. And the challenge was that the follow-up experiments didn't quite work out. And in the end, the correct answer was to just follow the science and write the story that was the story. And it all worked out. I don't know what lesson I learned from that other than to not pay as much attention to perceived prestige or things that you think other people will find interesting, and instead to just follow the science and do the kind of thing that your perspective on the science is. But I think going back, I would probably have saved a year of my life not doing that, right? And I think we all have stories like that where we spend time on an experiment that doesn't end up working out. This was something where I think a lesson could have been learned, or if someone had like shaken me more at the time and told me to stop doing that, I might have.
A couple of weeks ago, I was asked to talk to people at my current department as part of our internal Growing Up in Science series. And if you know Growing Up in Science is this really nice broader initiative where scientists are encouraged to share their stories, not just kind of the professional bio, but the personal struggles behind it, the kind of the real story of somebody's career. And many of them are online and really, really inspiring. And when I was, trying to figure out what I would talk about, I was shamelessly lucky. I was lucky getting into MIT. I was lucky getting a job after. So I'm not representative at all in terms of the professional struggles. And so for me, actually, the main struggle that I had was in the middle of my PhD, where I had some serious anxiety issues, which arose who knows whether it's a result of the PhD or, people who are drawn to academia also tend to have mental health issues. I had no issues with anxiety growing up, so it was kind of a surprise. It was all happening around like 2020 mainly. It was not as a result of COVID. It started shortly before, so causality, we know. It doesn't go back in time, hopefully. But yeah, I mean, I was kind of stuck at home, and I was actually kind of scared of public places, which was very convenient in COVID, so I didn't have to actually go anywhere. But it took a bunch of exposure therapy and getting reintroduced to crowded places and flights and things that you do need to do as part of the academia. So it was scary, and I know some of my friends and classmates have also gone through some mental health challenges. So I try to, acknowledge that and raise awareness, because of course there is still some stigma around it. And so these are the kinds of things that I think are useful to talk about.
I guess I can chime in with another kind of like broad science thing that, which is that whenever you're working maybe on a project, or you're working with somebody, I know that I have definitely experienced this, where maybe you're collaborating with somebody and just like things are not quite jiving, but you don't necessarily know how to talk about it, right? And I think that anyone who works in these very collaborative fields has probably had those types of collaborations where it's tricky, right? Like, scientists are people, and even if everyone has the best intentions, it can be really hard to work with other people. And I wish that somebody had just told me earlier that like that is normal, and the easiest way to deal with it is just to like have awkward conversations and talk about it. Because actually, if you are able to kind of foster a collaborative environment where people are willing to talk about the things that they maybe are struggling with a project, then people can get over those hurdles a little bit faster. Or maybe you're like stuck with a project and you're scared to ask somebody for help. Like that's something that I always try and like hammer into students that I'm working with. I'm like, please do not be stuck on something for a very long time. I think at some tech companies, it's like, don't be stuck on something for longer than like 3 hours, which is actually crazy. Whenever you think about like us in the academic world, they're like, if you're stuck on it for longer than 3 hours, then you need to go and talk to somebody and find a way to overcome it. So.
Okay, I have another couple more questions. This is for Xian, Janelle, and Anya. And what moment that really shaped your career path, even if it's wasn't part of your original plan? Be serendipity, accident. Doesn't have to be, but.
So when I just joined McGovern Institute, what I want to do is that to finish my project and then graduate and hit all these milestones in my life. And then there's one time I went to the SFN with 2 of my colleagues, and then there's this mini symposium about Schenck that is. Before the SFN, and there's so many of this like mini symposium, and then so they shared a lot of exciting progress in the field, and also there's also a family brought their autistic kid, and then that is the first time I saw autistic kid, and then I remember that his father was holding him on a chair, and then from that moment I feel like I want to help the patient. So then we went back to the hotel. Karen and I talked a lot about Schenck stuff, and then from that moment, I started working with her on her like adult rescue paper as my side project. And then Guoping came up with this idea of mini Schenck, and then we kind of make some progress. Right now, I'm working in the company and then try to understand how can we translate all these discoveries to something that could benefit patient in the future.
I mentioned in my talk that I am a cognitive neuroscientist by training, and still am, and still primarily care about how the human brain works, right? So all of this AI stuff was new and largely serendipitous. And the way I was trying to think how it came about, what happened is Ev and I think Ted Gibson had this like grant to collaborate with researchers in Italy, and I think you went to Italy, and then Alessandro Lenci came and here to give a talk and talk to some of the people here, and so we had a conversation where we discussed one of the neuroscience studies I did, and he said, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool to test that in a language model?" That was before language models were a thing that everybody knew about it. They were still like fairly niche, but they were starting to be promising as AI models. And we said, okay, maybe. He connected us with a postdoc collaborator in Italy with whom we've had a productive Zoom collaboration. Actually, we still haven't met in person since early 2020. And yeah, it was just this conversation that started a collaboration. Then COVID happened. So I remember us Skyping with our Italian collaborators when Italy was on lockdown before lockdown even came to the US. And of course, there we were talking science as scientists would. And it just started this whole chain of research that turned out to be so timely because we didn't know that ChatGPT was going to happen. And so now we had a little bit of a head start that allowed us to figure out what these models are and what to do with them a little bit before it became, the cool, popular thing to study.
Oh, am I next? Okay. Yeah, so the question was something that was unexpected, right?
Yeah, unexpected.
Okay.
It could be unexpected.
Yeah.
Just one moment.
Yeah, so I did my undergrad at MIT. I was double major in physics and brain and cognitive sciences. And then actually after that, I worked as an RA for Nancy Canwisher. So I've actually been around quite a while. And so after this time, whenever I was applying for grad school, I felt like I needed to get away from MIT. It sort of was this kind of strong urge. And so I actually started my PhD at the Berkeley and UCSF bioengineering program. So I decided to go there, and it was a really good decision actually at the time. And it was also a good decision whenever about a year into the program as I was trying to decide a lab. I was looking at 3 labs. I would have, I think, had really good PhDs in any of them. But I had some conversations with Josh McDermott back here and realized that I knew that I wanted to study the auditory system. I knew that I wanted to work on computational modeling. And Josh was the only place where I would be able to get the training that I needed. And so after spending a year in Berkeley, I decided to actually transfer PhD programs and come back to MIT. I like to sometimes say that I did not quite reach escape velocity at the time and came falling back. But that for me, it really just having, honestly, the reason why I say that it was a very good decision is because having that year sort of seeing other places and talking to other people and taking classes, it really made me appreciate the community that's here. And so, yeah, thank you for fostering such an amazing place that has really shaped my journey.
Jacob, Mark, and Dimitri. Looking back, what do you wish you had known when you first started at McGovern? What advice would you give yourself? Would you give your younger self starting that journey here at McGovern?
All right, so this place is great for so many things. One thing it's not great at, though, when I was a grad student, was helping me understand work-life balance. And so I was, I would say I was, and it was just, I was in the lab a lot, and this was great, and it was partly because I was just so excited about what I was doing. But I also, I didn't take great care of myself in terms of eating the right foods, right? So I would eat at the 7-Eleven, the taquitos that they had cooking for like days, I'd fall asleep on the couches up in the coffee rooms. I remember one time I was sleeping there and Bob Desmond walked in and I had this blanket over me and I get up and I'm in this sort of stupor and he just sort of was like, all right, so that was something I learned after I left here. And one thing, one thing I learned actually was to cook, right? So that so I was able to have a little better physical health, I guess, as a result of that. So if I were to tell myself something back then, it would be, make a little time to eat well, to work out, take care of myself physically. Yeah.
I'll just answer the question from the point of view of a grad student because I went to grad school here as well. And I think I didn't quite understand what grad school was back then. And I recently heard advice about how to become an artist that I think translates very well to that, which is that one way, certainly not the only one, is to just start imitating artists that you admire, and you just keep going and you keep going and you keep going until you can't really imitate them anymore, but you invariably put your own handwriting in the imitations. And at that point, you follow that, what is yours in the imitation, and that is your voice, that is your specific perspective. And I think this applies very well to grad school, where we're doing science under the leadership and in the image of people in our lab, of our advisors, until by the end of grad school you disagree with some things they say. And then the tricky thing is that you must have imitated this well enough, and you learned the techniques and the way of thinking that you know when to trust your instinct there and when not to. And I think by the time I came to Mark's lab, I trusted my instincts quite well, I think. But I think this process takes a little bit of trust at the time to really put in the hours and to understand that this process of figuring out what your unique vision is to science, that's your contribution, right? We heard a lot of examples today of scientific work that only happened because someone had their own specific voice. And it is important also that we bring more people that are not from traditional backgrounds into science, because what science is finding new solutions, and we don't know where they're coming from. But for each individual one of us, and specifically throughout this journey of grad school, I think it kind of comes down to knowing when to trust yourself and when not. And yeah, I feel like that's something that I didn't quite understand back in grad school, and maybe everyone just needs to discover this for themselves, but yeah.
Maybe I'll follow up these kind of bigger pieces of advice with something more mundane, which is I really wish I read more when I was a grad student. I just remember we had a really great cohort of grad students here, and we thought we knew it all. I mean, we were just talking all the time, and we thought that we were on top of the world, because it really felt like it. It was a very exciting time in neuroscience, and only later on did I start reading a lot more literature. And you know, in my case, the example is very clear. The system that I study has been studied for decades, and almost nobody knows about it. I certainly didn't know about it. And had I not been just reading random things, I wouldn't have even discovered that the system exists. And the thing is, you know, it's really good to feel right now that, oh, we have all these new technologies, you know, what did all these people before optogenetics even know about science? So it's really easy to kind of feel very dismissive about things that were done in the past. And you really get a very different perspective if you read more, because people were just as smart, and they had incredible intuitions, even when they were lacking in methods or anything like this. And I'd have to say, I'm not sure I came up with a single idea ever by myself. Definitely not from just talking to other grad students. And a lot of the people that I admire the most in science are just addicts to reading. And they're reading not just in their field, they're reading in other fields, they're reading outside of biology. They just can't stop, and they are able to piece together information. Quantity becomes quality at some point. You start piecing together information from in ways that you otherwise wouldn't, and they just develop much bigger perspectives on science. And I'm trying to get there, and had I started earlier, I think I would be closer to that goal, because I don't think I read a single paper in grad school. I mean, we were assigned a reading list. We were assigned a reading list for quals, and I read those papers. And then after that, you kind of read the things that you need to cite in your own paper. And this kind of culture of understanding the broader impact of scientific history and has been lost a little, I think, in the present time. So, anyways, that's maybe much more easy. I'm not sure whether reading is easier than cooking, but it's also definitely doable.
Okay, thank you for your insightful answers. I think we can wrap up. Okay, let's give him a round of applause.